Welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast, where we set aside time to have engaging conversation. Are you drinking? Oh, is this a practice run?
Yeah, can you hear that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's a practice run.
Oh, good.
It's a practice run.
Oh, yeah? It didn't feel like a practice run.
You can hear my drinking, though?
Yeah, because the thing is, the microphone is at your mouth, and you're drinking in your mouth.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast, where we set aside time to have engaging conversations on relevant topics related to behavior analysis. I'm Zachary Bird.
And I'm Caleb Davis. Zach, what's going on?
Hey, not much.
Happy New Year.
Oh, Happy New Year to you. Oh, this is great. 2022. I think it's a good year. So far, so good. I mean, here in Roanoke, Virginia, it was 73 yesterday, and it was beautiful. And I just feel like that is sort of a sign that 2022 is going to be a great year.
Yeah, okay, we'll take it that way, I guess. You know what else is exciting?
What else? What else?
Because it's January 2022, do you know what happened?
Omicron?
Nope. Well, yes, but also
we released another episode. Caleb,
yes.
This is amazing. It's only been 4 months since we released the last episode. Why the break? What are we doing with our lives?
I think we're just must be doing a lot of stuff with our lives.
Dude, so busy. We're very busy. But, that's good. It's good to be back here because now we can actually discuss something that's relevant to the time period we're in, which is that it's now 2022 and some things are changing as it relates to BACB requirements and supervision.
Exactly. So the new fieldwork supervision requirements take effect as of now. So January 2022, basically, if you're applying or you're looking to get your BCBA now, you got to meet these requirements.
Yeah, I mean,
and they're different.
They're different than when we went through school too. Quite a lot different. And actually, I mean, I'm glad that I'm a grandpa and got to be grandfathered into the old system, because this new system, it's tough, but it's going to create some great BCBAs though, I bet.
Yeah, it's no joke for sure. Because when we were in school, we did the intensive, well, at the time was called the intensive practicum model, yes. Mm-hmm. Which I believe it was only 750 hours. That's right? Mm-hmm. But it was very intense.
Right.
But now, just looking at the new requirements, now at a minimum, you have to get 1,500 hours. So it's either 1,500 or 2,000 fieldwork hours. Yeah, so the new kind of intensive model is actually 1,500 hours. So. Double of what we went through.
Yeah, it's good because there's going to be BCBAs double as good as us, and that's great.
Twice as good.
Yes.
Yeah, and just looking through it, because you need the increase in hours, just overall hours, but also the amount of unrestricted activities, mm-hmm. or the percentage, which I think we've talked about this before, but unrestricted activities would be like not working one-on-one with clients. It would be doing things that typically you would end up doing as a BCBA, right. Developing programming and researching and doing all those kind of things. Now it needs to be at least 60% of those hours have to be those unrestricted activities. So if you're doing the 2,000 hour track, you got to have at least 1,200 hours of unrestricted activities. Oh, good.
It's a good thing that the students nowadays are really motivated and they're really have a lot of perseverance. That's a good thing.
I really like it's easy for us to say because we're not in grad school anymore. But personally, right. I really like these changes because you said, Zach, I think it's really gonna I think it's going to create some really excellent BCBAs by just having like those added experience hours. But I also think just like the content that's being covered now, I think that there's like a greater focus on ensuring that like students get supervision in things like being a supervisor or things like diversity and like all these things that I don't think we got really specific training on going through. Right. So I feel like there's more to cover now in addition to like
there's like more things to cover because as a field, we're like coming to terms with the fact, or we've already come to terms, I think, with the fact that like supervising people is like very, very important. And that I think that like maybe several years ago, we kind of thought that if, hey, like I'm a good BCBA, I can just take someone under my wing and they're going to be a good BCBA too. And that like isn't true. I think that's just not true.
Right. You need specific training on how to be a supervisor. I think certainly it's not something, I think we've talked about this probably on other episodes, but it's like not something you just like want to wing. Like you don't want to wing it when you're being a supervisor, which I think as being, if you're a new supervisor, like you're somebody who's just getting ready to start the supervision process with a trainee and you're looking at like these new requirements, I'm sure that can be a little bit daunting. So
yeah, and it is daunting, but there are people in the field who are doing it very well, and they can help us to know what should we be doing. And there isn't a lot of research in the field related to this topic, but because it's becoming a hot topic and it's a thing that everybody knows is very important, more and more research is coming out about this, and this will help guide our supervision processes moving forward. But there's always this lag between practice and research. And so only now are we getting some good supervision systems and research coming out. And so I think that's a really good thing because now people can use those things. So I think that puts us going in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think for this episode, I think we should go out, find somebody who is doing research in this area of supervision and see if they can come talk with us, provide maybe some tips around developing some of these systems that might be helpful for ensuring that supervisees or trainees are meeting all these new requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Diana and Jackie, hello and welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, we are doing well. Zach and Caleb, thanks so much for having us on.
Yeah, of course.
See, I told you Diana always talks for me. I'm like,
hey now.
I'm just kidding.
It's still 2021, so I go first.
That's true. 2022, I'll get to go first.
Oh, okay. Cool, that's fair.
Alternate every year. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I took the first 5, so Jackie.
I get the next 5.
Dr. Diana Parry-Cruwys and Dr. Jackie MacDonald are professors at Regis College in the ABA program. They are also co-hosts of the ABA Inside Track podcast.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're discussing supervision, so we're really excited that you're able to come on and talk with us about some various supervision topics. So thanks again.
We love supervision.
That's great.
It's our jam.
And our job.
That's what we figured when we saw that you gals have been publishing very consistently on this topic. We thought there would be no one better to come in and chat with us.
Diana is a workhorse in this area. She is so good at writing and conceptualizing articles like research designs that I'm just lucky to be here with her.
Thanks, girl.
That's very sweet.
Well, and true.
It's one of those situations where I need to do all of the things that I'm doing for research for my job anyway, right? It's just part of my job to teach people how to go through the practicum experience. So if I'm going to do all of that, why not make the most of it and figure out how to really do it in best practice fashion so that my students are learning what they need to And I'm hopefully disseminating some of that to other folks who are in the same boat.
That's smart.
That's a great strategy. We wanted to ask, we know you guys have been working together to conduct this research that addresses the need for supervisors to provide this kind of additional support, like you said, to the folks who are already going through your programs. So you essentially chose this topic because you felt like might as well kill two birds with one stone. We're already in it.
Yeah, and I think it started off like a lot longer before the research started. When Diana and I started working together in about 2017 or so, when she came on board at Regis, and we realized that there are not a ton of guidance. There's not a lot of guidance for supervisors in the field, and every different agency does it differently. Some have a really good setup, right? And supervisors or trainees feel supported and they're getting everything to know. And then when they graduate, they're great BCBAs, where most other agencies don't have that, right? And so when students were graduating from the program, they were feeling nervous, right? They didn't really know where to begin. They were supervising poorly, right? They were coming back to us and saying, hey, my supervisor, I'm supervising like 10 people and I'm doing a bad job. And I'm like, yeah, of course you're doing a bad job because you don't know what you're doing. And this is all before, right? This is all before the 8-hour supervision training occurred, right? So I think the BACB has done a nice job trying to take steps in the right direction, right? Doing the supervisor curriculum, the 8-hour training, modifying it to the version 2. At Regis, we started an autism center to look at how we could establish, a really high quality practicum site while delivering high quality ABA services to clients. And then, then the BACB had more requirements toward the trainees. And I think this is what led us to the research that we are conducting now.
Yeah. So I think what you're speaking to is just there's a ton of variability right, in the field of like the quality of supervision. And so you're trying to kind of rein it all in.
Right. And no fault of
with your contributions.
Right. And no fault of older BCBAs, right? Because we never received supervision training, right? We didn't have class on supervision. We didn't touch upon it in coursework. No, right? We didn't, there wasn't an 8-hour supervision training for us when we started. It's basically like, you passed your exam. Yay, you! Go supervise everyone, right? But we all know that being a BCBA does not equal being a good supervisor.
Yeah, it's really different skill sets for sure. And, I think, we've been in this field for, I don't know, quite a while at this point. And in the sense of the length of the time in which this has been a career for people, right? But it hasn't really been that long when you think about the span of careers of other social science disciplines. So we're still in the thick of trying to figure out how to best move people into this career and have the skills necessary that they need. And I think the BACB has taken, definitely good measures in the supervision realm, but, I just did another 8-hour training recently. I mean, I taught it. I didn't do it. I taught it with the 2.0 and there's just so much that you're trying to fit into that 8 hours, right? And there's the technical side of things, which is what this research is really related to, just the ins and outs of what the fieldwork requirements actually are and how you're going to teach that to people. But that's just one like tiny sliver of what you need to know to be a good supervisor. And there's a massive amount of work that needs to be done as far as teaching people to be good mentors to their trainees, and what are the complexities of how to work with someone from a different cultural background than yourself, or how to bring in how to teach someone how to interact compassionately with the families that we serve. And we're just barely beginning to scratch the surface of how those issues need to be incorporated into supervision training, which is not what we will talk about here in this research. But I wanted to make sure we did talk about it because it's really important.
Yeah, for sure.
And nowhere is there soft skills. Not yet, but there will be, right?
Are you guys working on stuff?
There will be.
Okay, this is a great.
No, that's not a promise on our end, but there definitely needs to be in the field.
Okay. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Actually, I wanted to ask you both a little bit about more specifically some of the work that you folks do at Regis, because I think you have a highly effective program, and I'm basing that off of the over 90% pass rate that you have for graduates, which I think is like a good measure, at least one that I always look at when the BACB posts that list. I always go through and I kind of like look at who the different programs are.
Same.
And so, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty good metric. But what are some supports that at the Regis program that you found helpful in helping your students prepare for not only the exam, but just like having a successful fieldwork experience in general?
Well, as far as the coursework goes, we are really redundant. So we have a curriculum matrix that we've outlined for all of the courses that students take in the Regis program. And we take every part of the task list and make sure that everyone hits each part of the task list at least 3 times in 3 different classes. So by the end of like the 7 core sequence classes, they're like, I'm sure we've learned about this. I'm like, yeah, 2 times already. You've already learned about this. But that's one way I think we ensure that we are trying to cover a lot of the bases, right? We still have a lot of work to do. And each year we're revising the curriculum based on the BACB exam and then student evaluations, how we think the classes are going. But I think, that's one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that all of the task list items and all of the big mission objectives of our program are hit at least 3 times across all of the programs that we have, even outside of like that verified course sequence, because we have a few classes outside of that. And it's hard. It's not an easy program. There's a lot of crying at the end, right? But we're there. I'm just being honest, right?
Should know that going in.
Yeah, folks are stressed, and that comes in the territory of going to grad school.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I always say, I'm like, oops, I shouldn't tell people that you should cry. But not everybody cries. But it is stressful, right? You're working full time.
Guys, I can just cut that out.
Oh, it's okay.
No problem.
It's fine.
Okay, crying, leave the crying in then. Okay,
That's fine.
got it.
But it's a hard program. It's a hard program, but we have the supports in place. We have really small class sizes, right? It's a cohort model, so we encourage students to develop study groups. Each student meets weekly with their thesis advisor, one-on-one. So the thesis advisor talks about their research, but also talks about their practicum and talks about their life and talks about their job, right? So you have that like built-in support if someone's, falling behind, we can catch it very quickly, right? And provide that support that they need. And the program's pretty small, so right now we can do that. And then as far as practicum, Diana is on them.
I am.
Yeah.
So, one of the challenges with the move over to the 5th edition model is now everyone either needs to complete 1,500 or 2,000 hours of a course, of a fieldwork experience, right? Which is a huge jump, at least 100% jump up from the 750 of intensive practicum that we used to have everyone do. And so we've needed to modify how we approach going into practicum for that reason, because ideally everyone would like to collect all of those fieldwork hours during the 2-year program while they're in grad school, so that they get done, they're ready to take the test. So in order to try to make that happen, we've needed to move their first semester practicum back to the very beginning of their entire Regis experience. So they start practicum in the fall when they come in as a brand new cohort. And what that has meant for me is that there's a fair amount of prep work I need them to do in order to be ready to start accruing those practicum hours. So what I have done, I'm going to talk about the tracker training, right? And the tracker training version of that is a published paper was done in the intensive practicum model, so the 750 model.
Okay.
So in that study, what I had was the luxury of being able to meet with those students during the course of teaching them how to do the tracker training. We met via Zoom almost exclusively, but it was set up in such a way that I already knew those students, right? They were already enrolled at Regis. We had a relationship, and I was kind of able to put this extra work on them and say, hey, guess what? You have a whole like mini class to take on how to learn how to do the tracker. But it was more established, and I already kind of had, some rapport built up with them. what's happening now, to give you a view of how the tracker training has continued past that study, is now I have to reach out to students in the summer before they've even sometimes even come to Massachusetts and say, hey, I have work for you. And I have it all arranged such that it operates mostly independently via one of the learning platforms that we have. So students can go in, they watch videos of me doing the tracker, and then they have homework of different scenarios that they practice. They submit them. I do have to go in and grade them on Moodle. And then it's set up as a programmed instruction as well. So after they do the videos, then there's nice. Questions that they can answer within the module that will be self-correcting too. So I've worked to try to streamline that and make it work as smoothly as it can in an asynchronous format. And then anyone who needs extra help, then I set up a one-on-one Zoom meeting with them to kind of iron out the kinks. So that's been the progression of that. But there's so much that trainees need to know, right? Going in, you can't just give them the tracker and be like, here you go, folks, right? Read those requirements and then you'll be all set, because it's so confusing. Every single piece of it is confusing. And that's just in trying to record the hours. Figuring out what hours you need to accrue is also quite confusing, right? And the new system has the requirement of 60% of the hours need to be unrestricted time. So that's time that usually, if you're an RBT, is not really included in your regular workday. So helping trainees figure out what needs to be included on that tracker and is going to count as time for them so that they get the balance right is another whole piece of that initial training. So what I have set up for them is an initial pre-practicum module set that they do, where they review the fieldwork requirements. They have to take a test related to that. And then they go through a series of modules on different components of the tracker training that they're going to need to learn. And they have to fill out pretend trackers based on like a little scenario that I give them that get graded. And they only progress through those if they have made a certain score, right? And then I have another piece that's new as well, in addition to what is the published research. Two other components that I found students were having a really tough time with. One was what I call balancing the tracker, or balancing their hours, because you can put in whatever you want into that tracker, right? You can be like, I have so many hours, I've accrued so much time. And if someone's not there to check on it, or if you don't know yourself, you could get to the end of it and say, I have 1,500 hours. And someone else looks at it and says, oh no, you have 1,200 restricted hours, right? But that doesn't mean that you have 1,500 hours, because restricted time, it can only be 40% of your total. Where was I going with that?
Balancing.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Okay. So if...
See, I bring the extras.
Exactly. So if you don't have that in mind ahead of time and know how to make sure that your hours are all working out correctly as you go, the other pitfall is very often people don't get enough supervision time, right? So either 5% or 10%, depending on the type of time you're accruing, needs to be supervised. As people often fall into a pitfall there where they don't get enough supervision time and think they've accrued way more hours than they have, right? So I call it balancing the tracker, because you need to go through and make sure all your time's balanced. I got 10% supervision, I have 60% restricted time, only 50% of my supervised time is group and no more, right? All of those things need to happen. So since I've published this study, I've gone on to add in that component to my training too, and trainees have to go in and not only put the time in correctly based on like the pretend scenario, but then go back and say, oh, this pretend person has too much restricted time. I better remove some of that from the tracker to make sure it all works itself out. So I added that. And then also sometimes those monthly forms can be a little bit tricky too, the FVFs. So I have that added as a component as well. So all of those pieces, learning the requirements, learning the tracker or whatever hour accrual system, and then the documentation system, all of that has to occur before students start in our practicum program in the fall. So I have it all operating mostly independently and asynchronously during their summer before they come to us.
Sounds like a great system. Sounds like a lot of work. But
it is a lot of work. But again, it's my job, right? I'm the Practicum coordinator for the program, so I'm doing it regardless. I'm just trying to streamline it.
I give you a high performance evaluation.
Oh, thanks so much.
So do I. But then what happens, what we found before, right, is when students were accruing later and later and they didn't do any type of training, right, then they would lose like a month or 2 months in the program, sometimes even 3 months that they, have been working, but none of it counts because they have like completely screwed up everything with their tracker, and then you never know what's actually right? And you want to make sure that if they get audited, they still need to show proof of restricted and unrestricted time.
Yeah. So. And I don't blame the students at all because it is so confusing. Yes. And what I have found is that this is the piece that stresses them out more than almost anything else, is how am I going to get my fieldwork hours and how am I going to make sure that they're right? And there's like zero room for error, basically, because if BACB audits you when you send in your application, you have to have all that stuff ready immediately to provide to them. And if it's not right, they're not going to let you take the test and you may need to redo some of your hours. So it's really stressful for them. And there's not a lot of, guidance out there really on how to make sure that you get it right.
Right. And you can't just like submit it to the BACB before your exam and say, how's it look? Because they won't tell you. Right. Which is fair because there's a lot of people.
They have a lot going on.
They've got a lot going on, but there's like no guarantee that when you submit your stuff, that it's going to be approved.
I remember, after it was all done, putting in, I don't know if it's 5, 6, 7 pieces of paper into this envelope. And I was in Abu Dhabi at the time, so I just, put, 8,000 stamps on it and just sent it.
You covered it
and
in
I
stamps.
just had no idea. I just was it was a very stressful experience. Like all this comes down to these 6 pages of paper, and then I remember it. So it's very stressful.
I know. I had so many copies, even though they didn't accept copies at the time. I was like, I'm just going to keep making copies just in case.
Yeah.
I had a lot. I still can find my copies. I have them in a thing just in case.
It's very impressive.
In case I get audited 27 years later or something.
I still have mine too. They're in my basement in some Tupperware thing sealed off from moisture. So they'll stay
Dear
fresh
Dr.
forever.
MacDonald, I know you've had your BACB for 50 years.
Yeah.
But please resubmit your fieldwork requirements.
That would not be good.
Oh, that would be awesome. I'm like, no problem. Got it right here.
Well, you would.
I do.
I don't know where mine are.
It's
It's been more than 7 years, though.
I have yours, too.
You
Just
probably
kidding.
do.
I do. That's why I work well.
She only has 3 copies of yours, though.
Yeah, I have 7 of mine, 3 of hers.
I like the thing that you brought up about basically like balancing the hours. How frequently do you typically have students do that? Is that a weekly, bi-weekly thing? I like that idea of kind of keeping close tabs on it that way. Is that generally something you recommend?
Right. So in the paper, the gamification paper that we did, we made sure that they were balanced weekly. I found through that process that was a little much for some students, right? And some of them are like, well, I didn't meet with my supervisor this week, but I'm going to meet with them 2 times next week. So I know it's going to balance out within the month, right?
Yeah.
So, as long as students sort of have that understanding, then I can give them more leeway. So right now I just make sure that it's balanced every month.
Okay.
Yeah.
That seems like a very helpful tip, just if you're a BCBA providing supervision in general, just checking in every month or so to make sure the hours are aligning to those percentages that you mentioned.
Oh, I check their entire tracker.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Every month. Yes.
Before
I sign off, all the percentages have to be correct. And sometimes I do get this question. People will ask, well, the 60-40 unrestricted restricted breakdown, if you read the fieldwork requirements, is not a monthly requirement. The other percentages are. It's only across your entire experience. And I know that. but I do still require it every month anyway, because what I have found is that students get themselves into a bind really quickly by saying, oh, I know, like, I really want to count all these hours, right? And I know next month I'll get more unrestricted time, so I'm just going to count 50-50 this month, or, whatever it might be. If that happens, it really starts to snowball, and then all of a sudden they are really behind on unrestricted hours and don't necessarily realize it, right? They think that they're trucking along and getting all their hours, but the ratios are off. So I go ahead and require it monthly, that it's the 60-40 breakdown. If I have a student that goes into the fieldwork requirements and they themselves look at it and bring it to me and say, look, it says it's across the entire experience, I say, I trust you to keep track of it over the entire experience. But hardly ever has that occurred.
I think once.
Okay.
Yeah.
One time. And what we found too is that students will forget about the unrestricted requirement.
Mm-hmm.
And like some jobs will say, okay, you'll do all your restricted the first year and all your unrestricted the second year. So we've heard this from some agencies. But if that person doesn't work there any longer, or if, there's a staffing crisis in most agencies right now, right? So you're not guaranteed those unrestricted hours, right, for your job, right? That's just your coursework, not your job work. So I always remind students when they're talking to me, I'm like, talk to Diana first, because she does the practicum stuff. But know that the unrestricted stuff is not part of your job requirement. It's part of your coursework requirement. So you may need to do things on your own time.
Oh, yes.
You may need to go out and seek literature or talk to your supervisor about additional things for you to do. Diana created all of these awesome modules that people can access about a variety of topics, that they have to be related to their work in some way, or their coursework in some way, right? But that unrestricted time isn't a guarantee at your job. I think sometimes students forget that.
Hey, everybody. If you're interested in getting a CE for listening to this episode, you can purchase it at functionalrelationspodcast.com. This episode is worth 1 supervision learning CE, and you'll need to provide 2 code words when you go to check out. The first code word for this episode is thimble. 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 Whenever I'm sewing, I'm sure to wear a thimble on my finger. Thimble. Yeah, do you have any other... I feel like these are like nice little tidbits of information or tips for people that are providing supervision. Can you think of any other tips that both of you have learned over the course of like your experiences with providing fieldwork supervision?
I just want to kind of frame this question a little bit too, because I think that the tips are good. One thing we should think about, though, is that the systems that we're working in, which is that, as you guys have said, you're working in a college, university setting, and the systems for you are different than maybe a lot of listeners who are providing supervision right now, who might be working in one of those agencies, providing supervision to 1 or 2 people, and they're now listening and thinking, that would be amazing if I could go work at Regis and steal all of Diana's materials.
Have Diana balance the track there for me.
Well, we do have an autism center, so we both work in the university setting as well as the clinical setting, right? So we do provide supervision to practicum students within our clinical setting on campus as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you were a supervisor who is working in an in-home agency around the country somewhere and didn't have all these materials set up, do you have tips related to that, which is like, all right, I'm just getting started. This is my first supervisee or trainee. I need to do stuff. What do I do?
Sure.
Do you have tips in that way?
I think that each supervisory relationship needs to be tailored to what that supervisor knows and can feel comfortable, mentoring their trainee in, and then what the trainee needs to learn for the exam, right? Yeah. And then also what the trainee's interests are and their long-term goals are going to be as far as where they want to take their career. So every relationship is going to be different, and I would encourage supervisors to hone in on those 2 pieces, right? So certainly don't try to supervise outside of your scope of practice, right? But also don't just run down the task list. That's ultimately not going to be as beneficial for your trainee as listening to them and seeing what are the areas in which they particularly may need assistance. And some of those may be task list type things, right? And that's okay to spend time on that. But then also thinking in a larger way about not just like that exam is one point in time, right? And you have to pass the exam to be a BCBA, but you have to do a whole lot more than pass the exam to be a competent, well-rounded, ethically minded BCBA. And
it's the minimum requirement.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You've met the minimum.
Bare minimum.
Exactly. So if you were only spending your time with your trainee, going down that task list and doing definitions or whatever, they may be ready to pass the exam at the end of that experience, but there's just so much more, right? And you want to think about how are you really going to assist them in all of those varied skill sets that one needs to have to be a really good BCBA, and find ways to fit those in to your discussions related to, I don't know, extinction on the task list, right? And talk about it in that larger perspective so that they can be more ready to tackle the complex scenarios that they are 100% going to encounter once they become a BCBA.
Yeah, I would recommend, finding there's some supervision books out there that have good scenarios in them for trainees to play out, right? I would recommend incorporating types of scenarios into your supervision meetings so that you can start honing in on those critical thinking skills and problem solving skills, right? I actually discourage people from doing definitions in supervision meetings. So when we meet with our agencies that work with Regis, we say, please do not do this during your supervision meeting, right? That's coursework, right?
Mm-hmm.
In coursework, we do that. That's not what you need to do, right? I can't be part of your soft skills working with a client, teaching, how to navigate the clinical field unless I'm in our clinical placement, right? But coursework, I can get definitions down. Right. I can give you all that kind of stuff, but I can't give you like on the job training related to those definitions. So we really encourage our practicum placement sites where our students are required to work. They don't usually work outside of our practicum placement sites. That we discourage the definition giving because it's not helpful when you have someone that's qualified to just spout definitions, right? You can do that by yourself at your house with SAF meds if you want to. That can be your fun Friday night, right? It doesn't have to be your fun job night.
A question I wanted to ask both of you is there anything that you learned that surprised you from doing research in the area of supervision?
Sorry, I'm just pondering. I'm pondering what I want to say in response to that.
Right. I guess as was there anything that through the course of the research experience in this topic that changed the way you think about supervision or changed your practices around supervision?
I'm going to say for me, I used to find all the paperwork challenging, but not as challenging as it actually is. So I'd be like, I don't understand why people just can't do it. But then as we've started to make the modules and the trainings, I'm like, oh yeah, that's why, because there's why don't they just read it and do it? But that's not how people do it. That's not how people live, right? You can't just read something and know how to do it. So that was surprising to me. I think way back in the 2017s, coming in, yeah.
And the documentation has gotten so much more complex
100%
than it used to be. When we were all doing...
I had one sheet of paper.
Yeah. We're like, you did it, right? And you're like, yeah, I did it. That check.
There was that check. Yeah. I was like, did you do your practicum? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Did it.
Did it. So that's definitely changed. And I think, right, so having compassion for students and the stresses that they are under and how scary it can seem to have to fill out all this paperwork, fill it all out correctly. I do feel much better about my role as Practicum coordinator by providing them with more to go on, right? And breaking it down for them in this step-by-step way. And although they don't really want to do it, of course. Like, who wants to do extra stuff? At the end of it,
That sucks.
Clearly their tracker accrual recording is of a much higher quality than it was before I put this system in place.
Yeah.
So I do believe that it's working, and they give me the feedback that is working. So I think that I'm on the right track with respect to that.
The right track of trackering.
Exactly. With respect to these two different studies, right? So I have the gamification study, and then I have this one, like the more cut and dry, like tracker training study. Mm-hmm. I tend to find in my research that I try to tackle like a really big problem first, and then I back off and say, hang on, I don't think I got all the right pieces in place to do that. So I tried this gamification study first before I put into place the more specific tracker training, because I was just like, oh my gosh, why is no one filling out their tracker right? Right? Why is no one getting all their hours accrued? Let's try to
identify
make it
as
fun.
a motivational issue.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Oh, that was good. I should have said that part, but you said it, and that sounded great.
Okay,
super smart.
We'll cut that out.
No,
now you say, okay. I identified it as a motivational issue.
It was really fun, though.
Well, that's what I was about to say, right? Yeah. Is I was like, let's make it fun. Let's make it a game, right? And if anyone hasn't read the study, I went all in on this.
Completely
right?
in. It was insane.
I was like, we're going to slay a dragon, guys.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Right? And I had like a story that I wrote, and I made these like 3-foot big posters of dragons, and they had to color them in to slay them.
You got badges. You got all the things that you get in all the games.
So much stuff. Yeah. And I had a super great time doing this.
I did too.
Right? But we're kind of nerdy, and we're not in grad school. We're not under the same pressures, right? So then when I got the social validity back, a lot of people said this was a fun thing. But a few people were like, what in the world just happened?
I think those are the people in my class. They're like, why do I have to color this? We're in class. I'm like, but the dragon.
Right, but yeah, I know.
You earned the square.
Yes. So that was, I'm not going to say I was surprised by that, because even as I was, going to Staples and asking them to make me 2-foot by 3-foot dragon posters, I was like, this may not work. I don't know if my students are going to be on board with this whole idea. So I wasn't shocked that some people thought this was kind of stupid. But it was good for me to like get that perspective, right? And say, okay, not everyone has time in their lives to like read my like super bad D&D impression of my Dragon Slayer story, because I have put all of these other pressures on them in order to perform well in graduate school. And not just in our there's very limited research on graduate students and teaching in graduate programs, and throughout that research that I have encountered, many students have expressed less satisfaction in these types of additional additive components in the classrooms, right? As well as high levels of stress. So I think we have to be mindful of that if we're doing research with graduate students, that we're not adding even more to their plate without clear benefit on their side. So that was a little bit surprising, I guess, but also good for me to see and good for me to think about moving forward with what I'm potentially asking my students to do.
Yeah, that's a great example.
But it was fun.
It was fun. And I don't even like that kind of jam. Like, I'm not a gamer. I don't like playing games. I even hate playing like short games. Mm-hmm. But it was fun. Yeah.
So looking at that treatment package, all that was involved, what did you feel like was the most effective contingency? It's kind of like between us, right? No one else needs to know this. Mm-hmm. But like between us, I know that in the discussion, we're like, I don't know, because it was a treatment package and blah, blah, blah. But what do you think mattered?
Well, what I did in the baseline was provide them with the tracker and with some feedback. So it was not just a baseline, right? I did give them feedback and say, oh, you don't have enough supervision time, whatever that might be.
That's right.
So I would almost say it was the feedback, except that was in the baseline component. So I'm going to step back and not say that it was the feedback piece. What they expressed to me is that they did not really care that it was a team building activity. So I don't believe it was that component. people said that they did like seeing their own progress, and they did like getting badges, which was different than previous research.
Nice.
So maybe those components served to highlight their progress.
We also talked about maturation and just getting more feedback each week on doing it correctly.
Maybe, but we don't know. That would somewhat undermine the experimental control of the study. So
don't say
we won't highlight that part.
No.
Yeah. We'll cut that part out too, guys. We've cut out 3 parts already. Okay, that's fine. This is going to be a really short podcast.
This is
that's
fine.
Don't worry.
Inside the research.
I don't know.
Did you find anything else surprising, interesting?
I was actually surprised that people didn't like doing the actual coloring.
Didn't like slaying the dragon?
My class did.
My class did not.
But it depends. I think it depends on the students, right?
Students, yeah.
I think that's another important piece to take away from that is that we did not analyze ahead of time what was potentially going to function as reinforcers, right? I was just like, everyone will love coloring in a dragon poster. Right? And at the end, if you did it in a certain amount of time, then there were reinforcers available in the class too, or putative reinforcers, because I was like, everyone will love getting appetizers because I think that sounds really fun. So I didn't include that type of preference assessment for my students. And that is just important. I don't want to say it's surprising because it shouldn't surprise me as a behavior analyst, right? That you should check to see if you maybe have a reinforcer in place before you embark on some task.
Sure.
But it does underline that it's independent of population, right? That you need to look at what's going to be motivating for the individuals that you're working with. And, never forget that behavior is malleable and adaptive in whatever situation you're in. So I think that's probably a good takeaway. I have done another version of the gamification study as well that's not published since the time of this. And in that one, I did make more efforts. I did a preference assessment ahead of time and then individualized the reinforcers by classroom. Not by individual, but as best I could by classroom. I took out the dragon. We didn't do the dragon at all. Instead, we made it a competition between classrooms. We got similar results, but it's not out in the world yet.
Interesting. That's kind of cool.
It's coming soon.
I don't know if it's coming soon, but
by
maybe
the end
someday.
Of the year. End of the year. Yes, Diana. Just kidding.
This has been super interesting. Are there any other thoughts or things that you would like our listeners to know about your experiences with fieldwork supervision and these systems you've been talking about? Any take-home points?
I will say that all of this has required a fair amount of pre-planning. So if you are going to take on students, recognizing that there's likely going to be work for both of you to do ahead of time in order to have a successful experience. So if you're the supervisor, you don't have to, make a complicated game for your trainee, but you likely would need to know the fieldwork requirements in and out yourself and know what systems you're going to have in place as far as documentation, and then think about those from a trainee's perspective who's, entering into this brand new, likely for the first time, and isn't going to have the same background. How are you going to ensure that they know what they need to get the information down correctly, but also feel supported by you and confident? Because ultimately it is their experience, right? And it should be on them to properly track that and keep track of the whole thing. So you don't want them to end up relying on you solely for that, but rather, how are you going to make this a process by which they're going to grow up and you're going to then be able to let them go into the world?
And my piece of advice would be to read the Ethics 2022 Standard 4 on supervision to make sure that you are capturing everything that you are ethically required to do in supervision, right? Delegation, talking about cultural diversity, recognizing your own biases, showing up, right? Establishing a contract, making sure that you have all of that stuff in place, right? Because if nothing, you should be ethical, right? You maybe not will be the best supervisor, but as long as you're being ethical, you're starting from a place where you can't do much wrong, right? As long as you're
you don't have to be effective. You don't have to teach them anything. Just
be ethical.
Make sure they don't take any $11 gifts.
Right. Ideally, you're doing it all.
Ideally, you're doing it all, right? But if you are being ethical, you are hitting a lot of other milestones because you're thinking about those other things.
And talking to them about that.
Right.
Highlighting it for them will build that into their repertoire, that every time they're presented with a new situation, they have ethics at the forefront of their decision making.
Yeah. I'm saying the 2022 code because it gives us more of a scope of supervision than the older professional code of conduct.
Yeah, Jackie. So I think somewhere along the line I heard that you print out like a pocket-sized version of the ethics code, and I was wondering, when did you switch over? Have you switched over officially?
Yep, I switched over last year, and I made. Well, I haven't made them all yet, but yes,
they take a lot of time.
They take a bunch of time, and I make them by hand. And so that's around 20 to 30 a year. And so it does take a little bit of time. So, and last year I didn't make any because I didn't see anyone because of COVID, right? So I am now a little bit backlogged.
Yeah.
But it'll happen. Everybody's going to get one. 2022 is a little bit longer too in page length.
Oh no.
Just a tiny bit.
You have to make them even smaller.
I was thinking, is it a leap year? That's what I was thinking.
That's where I went to with that.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
One more day? No,
I just need more time in the day.
That makes sense.
Because I have to print them and cut them and laminate them.
It's a lot of work.
Put the little hole in them and put the ring on them. It's a lot. Yeah.
And can I add one more thing, Zach?
Yeah, of course.
Just as I was thinking, another thing that we do as we're getting ready to send our trainees out is I have them ask someone officially to be their mentor after they've graduated. And I always highlight, it doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be Jackie. It could be someone else that you work with. But have that person in place as soon as you graduate so that they're going to be there for you, because having your BCBA doesn't mean that you know everything, as you guys know, right? It's just the beginning of your learning process.
Anything.
Right. So
that's like that's the thing. We've talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect on our podcast like 5 times.
Yeah.
And it's real.
Yes, exactly. So going ahead and letting them expect that they're not going to know and that they're going to need to check in with someone and make that a regular part of their professional lives moving forward, that they have that person in place. So I would also have supervisors think about that too.
We've gone so far as to add it on our exit interview. Mm-hmm. Who is your mentor?
Oh, nice.
Please write the name down. So if they call us, I'm like, well, I see your mentor is. And then I say, like, have you referred to your mentor yet?
That's smart. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. You guys had so many insights, and we really appreciate your time.
You are so welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. It was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you.
Caleb, let's take some time to show our appreciation for the people that are supporting us through this functional relations podcast endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody. I know we've received support in so many ways. So like Zach said, we just want to take a second and say thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I appreciate a lot is when people who are listening to the podcast decide like, hey, this podcast is good enough. I'm going to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. People like send us messages, emails. We love to receive emails, Facebook posts, Instagram posts that they're commenting on and liking and sharing. That shows that they really like it. And that makes us really happy when we see those things. So thank you for doing that. We really appreciate it. If you do want to send us an email, functionalrelationspodcast@gmail.com. You can do that.
Yeah. And just a reminder, if you are interested in supporting us in more tangible ways, we do have a Patreon page. So our Patreon supporters are obviously very near and dear to our hearts. So if you're interested in that, certainly you can go to our Patreon page and check that out.
Absolutely. And Patreon is a website that basically allows listeners to access things like behind-the-scenes posts, bloopers, updates. We send along small gifts to our members to show our appreciation. In Season 3, there's the interviews are actually released there in video format, so you can kind of see the people we're talking to, and that's a good thing. And if you want to learn more about becoming a Patreon member, just go to www.patreon.com/functionalrelationspodcast. We'll put a link in the show notes if anyone's interested. But anyway, thanks for supporting us. Oh, one thing I want to mention is that one of our listeners sent us an email that she started a new blog. Amanda Steely started a new blog. It's called behavioralcontrast.com. Start this new blog. Check it out. That might be something that you'd like to read. It's got some good stories in there, and connect with her.
Awesome. All right. Zach, shall we move on to discussing our interview that we had with Jackie and Diana?
Absolutely. Let's do this.
It was nice talking to them, right? We haven't talked to them in a while.
Yeah. They're great people in general, very smart people too, and it was awesome to connect with them on this topic that they're very familiar with.
All right. So Zach, what stuck out to you from this? I know we discussed a lot. We discussed a lot about the research. We discussed a lot about just more like some like anecdotes that have been learned through the like supervision process that they have going at Regis College. What stuck out to you?
Yeah. All right. First of all, Regis College did not pay us anything for this promotion. We just support Regis College because they're an excellent program. We think that Regis has great people there, great professors, and but they didn't pay us anything. It sounded like a commercial when I was listening to it. I was like, wow, this is like a commercial. And it kind of is. We hope that you go there because it's a great program. But, that was all free. That was a free commercial. One of the things I thought was really that kind of stuck out to me was, all right, so I think Jackie said this, being a BCBA doesn't mean that you're a good supervisor. And that is, I think, a good sort of humbling line that we should keep in mind. And so that kind of stuck out to me as like almost like a theme, because it sets us up for saying, okay, then just because I'm BCBA doesn't mean I'm a good supervisor. Then I should do something else to make sure that I am a good supervisor, right? Like that's what I thought of, kind of like as a theme for this.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. It's kind of being open to like, it's like reflecting on like how you can do things better, or like it's like being humble going into the process. So especially if you're
that's
like
right.
a new supervisor, somebody that's like considering getting into supervision, kind of being humble and open to like and wanting to do things the best you can, right?
And also, I mean, I think that there are probably folks who have been supervising for a long time, and maybe they have like their way of doing it, but like maybe after listening to the episode, or maybe just episodes in the season, they're thinking, okay, like I think I can do this better.
Yeah.
And
it's like evolving. Our practice should always be
absolutely.
Evolving, right? And supervision is
good point.
No different.
That's right. Mm-hmm. What stuck out to you? Like, what are some things that you thought about?
Yeah, I think something that I did after the interview was I was kind of thinking about like all the things we discussed, and I was trying to think of it through the lens as like, how would I take what we discussed and improve my own like supervision practice, right? Like what would I do to like improve my systems and things like that? Mm-hmm. And so I thought that there was some good advice that applies to like setting up your supervision. So before you even get started, like what can you do up front? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I think that I definitely see the benefit in like training your supervisee or trainee up front on how to document things correctly. I just feel like that's like a good upfront investment in time, because it's probably going to save you and your trainee like a lot of heartache down the road, like by just like making sure you both are like super familiar with everything. I think as a supervisor, it also like forces you to make sure you know it in and out, because to teach something, I think there's no better way to like know something than to teach somebody else.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So I think that that's like a really good like thing right up front you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I think it relieves some stress, right? Because there's so much, we talked about it briefly in the interview, but there's so much stress when you take those pieces of paper and you send it off to BACB for like approval. And so if you know that you're doing it right, and your supervisee or trainee also knows that they're doing it right, then two people are like confirming like, hey, yes, we did this correctly. We knew what we were doing. And so it'll be a lot less stressful for everyone to just know that we've been doing it right. And it's going to get approved because we followed it to the T.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like we talked about in the intro, it's just like a lot of hours that you need. And so making sure that all those count, that you're getting all the credit for things by documenting correctly. I think it's just, I think we go on and on about like why it's just worth spending the time up front to make sure like you're all on the same page with like how to document things correctly, and providing opportunities to practice before like you're actually doing it.
Yeah. You know what it reminded me of a little bit was our episode with Dr. Linda LeBlanc. I think it was season 2, episode 4. Where she was discussing how to run effective meetings. And I was like a supervision meeting is a meeting.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
And so like following the steps of running an effective meeting, like having an agenda, having like a plan for how you're going to teach these things and what you're going to teach and what's the format and what are the things we want to hit up and what are the things we want to reinforce. And like, if you're running an effective supervision meeting, it's just running an effective meeting. And so you could go back and look at all the tips in that interview, because that was like, it changed the game for me personally.
Yeah.
Like all of my agendas in Google Docs now are like, I think very well designed, and it's been very helpful for me and the people at our company too. So
nice. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think those are good, I guess, like proactive strategies, if you want to think it that way, to like ensure that like as you're entering a supervision like contract or experience with somebody, that you got like stuff is like lined up, and so you're setting yourself and your trainee up for success. I was also thinking about like some things that came up in the interview that I feel like are important like within the experience. So something that stuck out to me is like doing more frequent checks of like hours, like percentages of like restricted versus unrestricted time, making sure you're getting your contacts with your supervisor and all those things. I think it was valuable. I think Jackie said like they do it like bi-weekly or something like that.
Monthly. They make sure they completely look at the tracker monthly.
Right. But I think they do like didn't they say like a bi-weekly check-in or something? Because they used to do it weekly, but that was a lot. And so they did it. Yeah. But either way, I think it's just good to be cognizant of that and be checking in frequently. Another thing that they mentioned that I really liked, and I think I've done this before, is making sure people are each month keeping their percentages or like ratios of restricted to unrestricted time like even. So the requirement is you need like 60% of your hours to be unrestricted, but I think I've seen this happen where like there might be a tendency to front load a lot of those restricted hours because you can get 1 million of them if you're working with students all day.
Right.
But as we discussed in the interview, I think that there's also some challenges that can arise with that if you end up like needing all of your like unrestricted hours at the end. Yeah. So I think I like the idea of kind of like each month focusing on ensuring that you have like approximately like the required like ratios to ultimately meet your goal.
Yeah, I think that's
or the
right.
goal that I guess like is set for us by the BACB.
Yeah. I mean, I like the change of the additional hours because, you know, I think we talked in our intro a little bit, but also Diana and Jackie mentioned it too, that so like now we have more hours for supervision, but I like this because it allows for us to focus in on these soft skills that are basically needed to become a good BCBA.
Yeah, right.
These sort of soft skills should be, you know, planned for. And actually, in our previous episodes in this season, people did talk about like these soft skills being very important. And so I like this sort of, it seems like adding the extra hours that are required now allows for more ability for people to focus on some of these other areas. And that's a good thing for our field in general, I think, because when we were going through, you know, there just wasn't a focus on those things. So
yeah, I mean, when I've done supervision in the past under the old standards, I can just remember thinking to myself like, oh, I wish I had more time with my supervisees.
yes,
Like there's
right.
more things that I wish I could like hone in on in more detail. So I think it's cool that hopefully these the greater number of required hours will just be a good thing in the sense that we'll have time now to focus on maybe those things that in the past we didn't have as much time to focus on.
Yeah. And probably everybody's going to be sad about adding hours. But, you know, it's for the good of the field, everybody. It's for the good of the field.
That's right. Nice. So, yeah, I think that those things we just discussed kind of like all fall into like what to do like during the supervision experience when you're in it, when you're, you know, 782 hours in it. Like what are you doing week in and week out or by like each month to make sure that like you're on track to finish things and have all your hours, like the right percentages and all that stuff. But something I thought that was really cool that they do is that they have at the end of supervision, at the end of like the supervision experience, they have each trainee identify a mentor, which is really kind of a cool idea.
It is.
Just to make sure. I think by doing that, you set the stage to have a conversation with somebody that hopefully you already had, but like as they're on their way out to become a BCBA, you're like, hey, you don't know everything. You need somebody to be like available to you like on an ongoing basis, like as you grow into becoming a more like seasoned BCBA, because it's kind of just I feel like just like that act in itself like sets somebody up to be like in the right like frame of mind going into the field of like I need somebody to like, especially initially, to be there to support me potentially.
Yeah, I actually think that's something that maybe is changing in the field in a good way. Like, I kind of feel like when we were just like, this is not that long. I mean, sometimes we talk like we're 70 years old, but like literally just like 8 years ago, I kind of feel that there was a lot of thinking like, once I become a BCBA, I've like made it, I've done it, and now I can do all the stuff. I have all the skills I need to be a BCBA, and no one needs to teach me anything new. I don't need to learn anything. But I do feel that maybe there's more now, like new BCBAs that I've come across recently are talking about how like they want mentorship and guidance and support. And that's a good thing. I mean, that's a very good thing. So I'm glad that that's changing a bit, because I just remember my first, I don't know if it's my first, but one of my first supervisors after I got my BCBA, the company in general had this kind of rule that was like, we care about your clinical work, but we also care about all the other things more. And I was like, you care about it more? Like, clinical work is so important. And like, I just felt like the things that I took the exam on were the most important things. And we sort of have it, and I've learned that I don't think that that's true. And in our company at PBC, we basically go by the rule that like 80% of being a good consultant, at least, is like building relationships and those soft skills, and like 20% is clinical work. And that's a hard thing to come to terms with, given that you just spent 3 years like learning all the clinical stuff in classes and blah 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 and all that stuff. So
yeah, that's a good point. I can see that. Like we just discussed, hopefully now there's more of a focus during training on the development of those skills. That certainly sounds like your company values, but I just know, like, I'm sure so many companies, and yeah, so many companies like really care about that.
Yeah,
as we should.
Yeah, and mentorship is an important part of that. And yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I have mentors that I'm reaching out to all the time, colleagues that I'm reaching out all the time, and I really appreciate them. And you, Caleb, I'm always reaching out to you, different various things, because you run into situations that you just don't know what the right thing to do is, and it's good to bounce ideas off people.
Hey everyone, if you've been listening to this whole episode and you're interested in getting a supervision CE, the second and final code word is sunglasses. 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 Caleb looks so cool in his new Oakley sunglasses. When you finish the episode, head over to functionalrelationspodcast.com to purchase your supervision CE. Oh, and also, if you're in need of ethics CEs, you can get 2 ethics CEs for any of our episodes from season 1.
All right. Well, I feel like this was a very helpful episode. I think there's definitely some actionable things that I took from it, like that I personally can implement when the next time I'm doing supervision, but hopefully our listeners also saw some things that they can, or heard some things, I should say, unless you have Patreon and can watch it.
That's right.
Yeah, so I feel like that was a good episode to end our supervision season on, because this will be the third and final episode that is for
supervisors.
CEs.
Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Right. So yeah, for supervisors who are looking for continuing education credits that count towards supervision, this will be the third and final one for the season that will count towards that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Caleb. This was excellent. Thanks to Diana and Jackie. You can check out them on their podcast, ABA Inside Track.
Big fan.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've listened to, I don't know, how many dozens of episodes, right? And also, you could work with them, because you could go to Regis College and work under them, and maybe they could be your supervisor. So check out Regis College too, because they have an excellent program there. So thanks, everybody, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Functional Relations Podcast.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.